Welcome back to the global trade circus. It's the same old show, where the US and China keep their never-ending trade war heated while Europe just watches from the sidelines. And don't even get me started on so-called progress with the EU. Spoiler, it's as slow as a snail on a coffee break. Let's dive into the complexity of this global trade war, where tensions keep escalating and world powers play a game of dominance with no end in sight. The US-China trade war. Oh, it's still going strong, folks. No de-escalation in sight, just more tariffs, more tension, and possibly even a global trade war. Ian Bremmer says this fight is like a bad soap opera, it never ends. The real question is, who's actually winning here? The US is the world's largest economy, so, of course, it's flexing its muscle. But here's the thing, other countries. Yeah, they're just too scared to stand up to it. It's like a schoolyard bully that no one dares to confront. While the US holds firm, China is looking for every opportunity to expand its global influence, from trade deals to strategic relationships with developing nations. US and EU relationship status, it's complicated. And then there's the US-EU relationship. Let's just say it's complicated than a Facebook status. While Bremmer suggests some EU nations might lower non-monetary trade tariffs, don't hold your breath. Europe, after all, is a union of 27 bureaucratic nations. So, don't expect them to make decisions any faster than a snail racing contest. While the US pushes for quick deals, the EU seems like the slow movers, calculating every step, making sure they dot every I. Imagine trying to make a large ship turn around, it's not going to happen overnight. Europe has its internal issues, with each country having its own interests, making global trade deals even more difficult to negotiate. The US losing allies. Oh, this doesn't look good. Bremmer also warns that the US is losing its alliances, and it's happening fast. It's like an episode of Game of Thrones, but this time, the US is the one getting betrayed. With escalating trade wars, strained relations, and a diplomatic approach that leans more toward the art of the deal rather than the art of making friends, the US is starting to resemble that person at a party who only talks about themselves. Sure, they're loud, but it's not exactly winning over hearts and minds. The problem? The world is changing, and so are the global power dynamics. While the US has traditionally been seen as the leader of the free world, its current policies are driving wedges between former allies. Take Europe, for example. What used to be a solid bond between the US and the European Union is now under strain. The EU is increasingly skeptical of US actions, especially with the unpredictable nature of trade wars. The recent tariffs imposed by the US have had significant economic repercussions for European businesses, and the US seems more focused on fighting these battles alone. As a result, Europe is starting to look for new partners, specifically China, which is offering more stable, long-term agreements that are much more appealing than constant trade disputes. Let's not forget Japan, Canada, and Mexico, all of which have long been close allies of the US. However, as the Trump administration pushes forward with protectionist policies, these countries are finding themselves at odds with their neighbor to the south. Canada has already taken steps to diversify its trade relationships, including seeking closer ties with China and other nations in the Pacific. Japan, for its part, has been careful to maintain good relations with the US, but there's a limit to how much they can take when it comes to unpredictability and tariffs. And don't get me started on the ASEAN countries. They're starting to explore closer relationships with China too, seeing the potential for better trade terms and infrastructure deals through China's Belt and Road Initiative. The US can't continue to rely on its old alliances if it doesn't shift its approach. If America continues to isolate itself with unpredictable policies, these alliances will continue to weaken, and China will only benefit more. China's new strategy: come here, let's talk. And then there's China. You know, while the US is busy starting trade wars, China's over here making new friends. Europe is starting to notice too. While the US has been shouting tariffs from the rooftops, China's been quietly shaking hands and making deals with the EU. What else? China isn't just playing checkers, they're playing 4D chess. And the US? Well, they're still stuck on the monopoly board, arguing about who gets to be the banker. And then there's China, stepping in with a strategy that's quiet, effective, and increasingly attracting the world's attention. While the US is busy starting trade wars and imposing tariffs, China is working on building relationships. What's China's secret weapon? Soft diplomacy. Rather than engaging in short-term, high-stakes battles, China is playing the long game. While the US can't seem to make any lasting deals, China is cultivating deeper economic and political relationships with countries across the globe. They're signing trade deals, investing in infrastructure, and offering loans to developing nations, things that, frankly, the US isn't doing at scale anymore. Let's focus on Europe for a moment. While the US has been forcing EU nations into tough trade talks and tariffs, China has quietly been courting them with offers they can't easily refuse. We've seen China make significant inroads into Eastern Europe and beyond, with massive investments in infrastructure projects that promise to strengthen economies across the continent. Whether it's through the Belt and Road Initiative or bilateral trade deals, China is positioning itself as the preferred partner for European nations, offering long-term stability in exchange for cooperation. The EU is starting to realize that their current relationship with the US is less beneficial, given the constant volatility in trade relations. In comparison, China is offering stability, predictable terms, and the chance to diversify their economic partners. China's approach is simple: build trust, offer opportunities, and create long-term partnerships. For Europe, this is appealing. Especially after feeling the economic pain of the trade war with the US, China is becoming a more attractive partner, not just for economic growth, but for security as well. The EU's desire to reduce dependence on the US is growing, and China is filling that void with grace and patience. But don't just take my word for it, look at what's happening in Africa, Southeast Asia, and even Latin America. These regions, which once relied heavily on the US for trade, are increasingly turning to China for better deals. The US may be a superpower, but China is playing the role of the steady, patient investor, making long-term commitments and nurturing relationships that will pay dividends down the road. The US. They're still playing a game of checkers while China is playing 4D chess. And while America argues about tariffs and trade wars, China quietly builds alliances that could eventually shape the next generation of global trade. So, what's the takeaway here? The US is still trying to flex its muscle, but the world's not exactly trembling in fear. China's applying a slow and steady wins the race strategy, and Europe? Well, they're taking their sweet time deciding who to side with. Will the US find its footing, or will China pull ahead in this great game? Stay tuned for the next episode of the Global Trade Drama. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think is winning the global trade game, the US or China? Let me know below.